All right. Well, we're jumping into I Am That by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. And, we've been talking about the states of mind and that the Supreme is beyond everything. Uh, this notion of the unchanging absolute being the substrate of reality is from what I'm beginning to understand, the real difference between modern Buddhism and the path of Jnana, in that the Buddhists seem to hold to this idea that the constant change is the reality, that there's no unchanging reality behind it. So, kind of an interesting distinction, and it's probably because I'm so accustomed to thinking of like a Vedantist. It's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around the idea of an unchanging reality or a constantly changing reality. Uh, but actually, in essence, they're both true because both are eternal. The fire and its power to burn and the milk and its whiteness, even though they can be spoken of separately, there's no way to divide them. There's no way to think of one without the other. And so really it's a moot point. It's a difference that's not a difference in our philosophies. Because yes, you could look at it from that side, from the side of the changing, which is very natural to us, because that's the one we inhabit as we identify with mind. But that the reality is even deeper than that sense of I, that sense of being, that isness without attribute, that ties us all together.
Swami A, you're echoing, so I think we need to be muted.
Okay.
Thank you.
There we go. Everyone's muted. All right. So we're in section 20. The Supreme is beyond all. And we're at the top of the page under that with the question that says, I can now understand, if you're trying to find your place. He says, I can now understand that I am not the person, but that which, when reflected in the person, gives it a sense of being. Now, about the Supreme, in what way do I know myself as the Supreme? It'd be fun to kind of take shots at answering these questions on our own without reading his first, to go around and just say, well, I think. We used to do that in the monastery class in San Francisco, actually. But so how do I know myself as the Supreme? Maharaj, the source of consciousness cannot be an object in consciousness. To know the source is to be the source. When you realize that you are not the person, but the pure and calm witness, and that fearless awareness is your very being, you are the being. It is the source, the inexhaustible possibility. So this is that can be simplified with just when that young man asked Swami Vivekananda, is God real? And Vivekananda says, oh yes, God is very real. And the little boy says, well, why can't I see him? And Vivekananda says, well, have you ever seen your face? And the little boy is like, no. He says, but do you have a face? Oh yes, God is like that. And it's exactly the same physical setup. We can't objectify our face because we can't put it in front of our senses. It's holding our eyes and it's just in front of our ears. So there's no way to perceive it. We can perceive a reflection of it, but we can't perceive the thing itself. And it's exactly the same as what Sri Nisargadatta is mentioning here. In this reality, we can't see God for the same reason. Thou art that. And we can't objectify the divine because he's behind the senses. He's behind the mind. And so the only way to know that you are the Supreme is to drop all attachment to any attributes that you have. Any attribute is what separates you from God, from the divine, from the oneness. All descriptions of yourself are of the ego, are of egoism. Any idea of yourself having an attribute, the only attributes we're allowed to identify with is Satchitananda, being, wisdom, and love. Those are the only things we can accurately say about ourselves. But even those are the last three things that you can say about yourself before you merge into an infinite. The Buddhists call it emptiness because it's beyond attribute. The Vedas call it fullness because it's all attributes. So again, the same thing looked at from two opposing perspectives, but seeing the same truth. It can be described any way you want because all of them will be wrong. Any description you make. So the source of consciousness cannot be an object in consciousness. So the source of it cannot reflect itself. To know the source is to be the source. So when you set down everything else, this is what you are. And it's not that you become that. You've always been that, but you haven't set down everything else yet. So you don't know that. And to put it in the way that I like to take it apart, you're living in mind. You haven't yet moved into the unchanging heart. And so you can't see yourself. You can't feel your bliss of your existence, the joy of being. To know the source is to be the source. When you realize that you are not the person, but the pure and calm witness, and that fearless awareness is your very being, you are the being. It is the source, the inexhaustible possibility. And it's that inexhaustible possibility, which is this constant flow of unrepeating change that we experience in mind when we are of mind. Are there many sources for one, or one? Are there many sources or one for all? Maharaj, well, it depends on how you look at it. From which end? The objects in the world are many, but the eye that sees them is one. The higher always appears as one to the lower, and the lower as many to the higher. There's a cool statement right there. So it depends on from which end you're looking at the reality. Are you looking at it from the end of ignorance? Then it will look like the multitudes. But if you look at it from the other end, it's a singularity. And both are eternal states. This is the part where the mind kind of turns into a raisin, shrivels up and dies, trying to comprehend things that it can't comprehend. So both are true, and both are a description, an accurate description of the reality, but from two perspectives that really don't exist. Ignorance is not a thing. It's a lack of knowledge. And so it's not really another place. So even that falls apart. It's just that the reality is not going to lay down and get into a box for you. It's not going to happen. So it's both the multiplicity and it's both a singularity simultaneously. It's change and unchange, change and absolute simultaneously. It moves and doesn't move, which, used to be the science. In science, you used to look at that idea and think, oh, that's ridiculous. How can you be moving and not moving at the same time? And then I read in a Wired magazine article some 10 years ago now, probably maybe 15, that they had managed to put a particle into a state of moving and non-moving simultaneously. And I thought, well, there you have it, the end of the world. We've proven that even the reality, even what we call reality, this empirical reality, that's so secure, even it is not, when you get down to the roots of it, it doesn't play nice with the mind. That article ended by saying the ultimate reality was like an infinite ocean of black goo, which doesn't take form until it's observed, and in which time passes forward and backward simultaneously. And I was like, that's the weirdest description of God I've ever heard. This black goo. So the shapes and names are all of one and the same God? Again, it all depends on how you look at it. On the verbal level, everything is relative. Absolutes should be experienced, not discussed. Okay, so he's saying, we can't talk about these things. That they don't fit into language, because language always assumes the tools of the mind. The language always assumes a past, present, and future, because all the tenses of the verbs are put together that way. And language always assumes causation, time, space causation in its structure. And so when you're talking about something that doesn't meet those requirements, you're going to have to come up with a new language, a new way of working. But you can't, because language is a tool of mind. The mind designed language, and it put its own tools into it, its necessary tools. So you can't have a language to describe something that's outside of time and outside of causation and outside of change like that. So how is the absolute experienced? It is not an object to be recognized and stored up in memory. Okay, so it's not going to happen through the mind. That's what he's saying here. It's not an object to be recognized, so it's not a part of something. It's not boundaried and it's not separate from something. And it can't be stored up in memory because it's not part of the continuum. It's not an object. It doesn't have relational relationships with every other object because it's simply not of that ilk. It's not of that genre. It is in the present and in feeling, rather. It has more to do with the how than with the what. It is in the quality, in the value, being the source of everything. It is in everything. Right? This is not clear. This is not clear, but it's reminding me of a few things. Let's see if we can put this in some easier form here. It is not an object to be recognized. Okay, we know that. So it's not of ego. It's the antithesis of ego, actually. So it's not, there's no separation, no attribute, no boundary. It's not an object to be recognized and stored up in memory. So it's not existent in the mind, cannot be held by the mind, because it doesn't have the fundamental requirements that the mind's tools need. It is in the present. Okay, so it's your isness. Before mind has calculated it, before mind has colored it or described it. It is in the present and in feeling, rather. So it's an intuitive, because you can't focus any of your senses on it, right? Because your senses are, the observer of the senses are the thing itself. You can't focus the senses on it. So it's a feeling, it's an intuitive sense of being. And in your meditations, usually it's in that kind of weird state or space that you become aware of your bliss. You're not, it's when your absence of thought and your absence of understanding or trying to figure things out when you're in a good meditation, that absolute stillness. At that point, there's kind of a feeling, but it's not a feeling because it's not caused as such. It seems to be spontaneous, real, spontaneous and real. That it's something that you only know by not knowing anything else. You only hear it by not hearing anything else. You only sense it by not sensing anything else. You're just in that silence. It comes up from the back. It doesn't come in through the front door of the senses. It comes in from the very back of yourself. It creeps in. It creeps in around the eye from the back. So you can't see it coming or going. So it has more to do with the how than with the what, because it's an uncovering, right? How to uncover. The what would be objectifying. Let's go find our enlightenment. Let's go achieve our enlightenment. That's when you put it out in front of the senses. But when you stop and say, let me realize my enlightenment, which means let me find it in the moment now, that's how it is found. That's how it is discovered or realized, is by saying, let me realize my realization, my nature in the now, in this moment. And once you take it off of the timeline, then you'll start seeing some of these hints. It's like Thakur says, as is a man's feeling of love, so is his gain. in his meditation. As is his love, so is his meditation. As is his feeling of love, so is his gain in his practice. And so that sense of love is always present in you. That glow of love, which we call bliss, is always present in you. But it's such a gentle, kind feeling of fondness of the soul for itself that it's easily clouded by even a single thought. And so it's only when you're in that silence that you become aware of the bliss of being, of what you are. It is in the quality, in the value, being the source of everything. It is in everything. And this, you could sort of talk about this in that you will experience it to the extent that you're able to accept unconditioned love. If you're able to get your mind to open to unconditioned love, if you're able to get it just to sit and to accept that, that's an infinite proposal. And in that process of opening, everything else falls off because it's an infinite space, right? This unconditioned love is an infinite space and an infinite expansion. And so if you just open and accept it, everything else goes silent. And this is the quality, the value, the being, the source of everything. It is being in everything. Because love and unity are the same. Those are synonyms. Unity and love are one and the same. And love is realized in union, in one without a second, where there's pure equanimity of an equal distribution of love infinitely in all directions. Yes, and so this is the wonder really of what we sit to experience, to know not in the mind knowing, but to know in this primordial way, this isness kind of way. If it is the source, why and how does it manifest itself? It gives birth to consciousness. All else is in consciousness, right? So it gives birth to consciousness. So it in itself, remember, is awareness. So awareness can exist in itself. It's a completely open state of everything becoming an ear in you. You know, you have no organs of action, you have no organs of sense. You're just simply, everything becomes an ear. And even the mind, your mind becomes a listener. You watch the things that go through the mind, you know, and see it as a sensory tool. You're opening in your meditation, you're turning your whole being into a big giant satellite dish toward itself, toward the divine source. So if all of your organs are an ear, then nothing is making noise. Right? That's the corollary. So nothing is making noise. Everything becomes an ear, so you're sensitive to every form of everything. And that is pure awareness. Consciousness is when that gets reflected in mind, when you start observing mind, right? Awareness, the light of awareness, bounces off of mind, reflects in mind as consciousness. And then mind creates objects within that space. Mind creates boundaries through the use of egoism, through the wrong identity of a particular, of a point. It begins to reconstruct the universe in the mind as best it can through relationships. And, that's why in science, the first thing we do is categorize everything. It's of this genre and of this species and this, that, and the other. And incidentally, oddly enough, that's one of the first tasks that Adam and Eve were given, naming and categorizing the creation. So you see, it's all indicated. Even thousands of years they knew these things. So if it is the source, why and how does it manifest itself? It gives birth to consciousness. It makes consciousness possible. It creates the space which allow objects. It creates the silence which allows noise or speech. So it's the framework, and then the framework gets populated by its reflection. Why are there so many centers of consciousness, Maharaj? The objective universe, Mahadakash, is in constant movement, projecting and dissolving innumerable forms. Whenever a form is infused with life, prana, consciousness, chaitana, appears by reflection of awareness in matter, awareness in mind. We don't know what matter is. We're going to say that matter and thought are the same as an experiment. That matter and thought are the same. And so whenever a form is infused with life, with prana, consciousness appears, right? Because being a form is itself within mind, and that mind is of reflections of awareness. So it appears by reflection of awareness in matter. Questioner, how is the Supreme affected? Maharaj, what can affect it and how? Right?
Swami,
The light. Yes.
sorry to interrupt, but
No
I
worries.
have a question. So this is kind of unrelated, but I was thinking about the stilling of the consciousness, which we try to do during meditation. So we basically do not want our consciousness stirred too much at all, right?
We don't mind anything. It's not a matter of stirring it. Well, it is. It is. Okay, let me take that perspective. Yes, to not stir it, and what stirs it is any sense of me and mine. So
Yeah.
what we're actually trying to do is not to not stir, but to release of any attachment, the release of any attachment that has created a particular me and mine.
So, for instance, you know, if it's not related, if it's related and yet it's not, every encounter we have in our lives, whether it's a book group or a discussion with ladies on some profound topic or whatever, but it also creates a lot of dissonance. And
yes.
and so it's coming to picking and choosing, or is that kind of like an, you know, I'm not at a place where you can actually completely not be stirred up by it, you know.
Right.
So you get all caught up in that, and then it pervades your consciousness for a good amount of time, and then you have to come back again and kind of still it. And so it's kind of becoming very arduous, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, well, when you approach it that way, when you're trying to still it, it's going to be arduous and it's going to be impossible. The only way that the mind stills is through dispassion, through disinterest. So you let the mind be as noisy as it's going to be. There's not really any way to stop it. Any effort you make to stop it is just putting more energy of dissonance, like you talk about, into the mind. Because the reason the mind is so active, that is dissonance alone. That is Maya alone. And it's being caused by your insistence of being a particular, a me and a mine. By your insistence within the universal mind, within the universal self, your insisting on being a particular stirs the mind, causes all of that vibration in there. And as long as you identify with any of the contents, that also maintains the dissonance and will create more noise in the mind. And so the practice of stilling the mind has nothing to do with mind. It has everything to do with you removing the insistence of me and mine from the picture. So you just watch the mind, let it do whatever it's doing. It's going to do it anyway. Be uninterested and do not make the mistake of thinking that any one of those thoughts is yours. or that any one of those thoughts has anything to do about you, with you, has any relationship with you whatsoever. You are not the mind. And so it's always good in meditation. I've just been doing this for a week or so in my meditations, and I found it to be extremely a good idea, especially at the beginning of the meditation, to kind of set up your interior parameters. Remind yourself, like, feel the body and feel feel the way that it communicates with mind. Become aware of that, and then deny it. I am not that body. I am not that. Those feelings do not apply to me any more than anybody else's feelings in the universe right now to me, since I am the same I in everyone. These ones that I'm feeling because of attachments in this body are not me. And so you just start letting go. You just start relaxing out of the importance of the body. So you just kind of let the body make its noises and its feelings, and you just leave it. And then you move to the mind, and you watch the mind, you watch your thoughts, you watch how you're forming words, and you try in that to identify the listener. Who's listening to the mind? That's me. That's the unchanging. And the mind is not me. And so by doing that, you try and settle into what you're not thinking of. You try and settle into what you are not thinking of. The sense of you that's watching but not thinking, the sense of you that's observing but not calculating, the sense of you who is seeing but is not being described by mind. And so you just sit there, and it's really just a statement, just an allowance. It's not catching anything. Just don't catch anything that's thrown at you. Whatever the mind or body brings up, don't be fooled into thinking that it has something to do with you. It's that identity alone that is causing the trouble. That thinking that anything going on in this body or mind has anything to do with you. That is the problem. You think it all has to do with you, and that it all describes you, and that it is all sourced in you. So that thought of a desire, instead of seeing it as a thought of desire, you see it as I want. Right? Instead of seeing it as a thought of desire that floats up and then disappears, you identify with it, and you see it as a statement of I want. That's where attachment happens. You attach to a thought that had nothing to do with you. And by attaching to that thought, you take on an attribute. And by taking on that attribute, you take on a perspective. And by taking on that perspective, you see the moment incorrectly. The moment falls into the world of objects and change. And you experience it as an imaginary being.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So Maharaj, do you do this discerning throughout the day? Or, I mean, I guess one thing is to do it during the meditation, sitting meditation.
Yeah,
but
well,
other thing is...
Yeah, it's something you should do all the time, and not just in meditation. It should become just a habit. Like you should, every impetus for movement during your day. I know this is too big of a homework assignment to possibly do, but we try. That you should become aware, any motivating, any action-driven movement during the day, you should always know where it's coming from. Is this coming from the body? Is it a hunger? Is it a thirst? Is it a fixing of a pain? Is it, what is causing this impetus for movement, for change in me? And you identify, oh, that's the body. And then you can withdraw from the body. You've got it clearly in your mind. Now withdraw from it. Or is it something from the mind? Is it a mood? Is it an anger? Is it an emotional reaction? What is causing this impetus for movement? And then you say, oh, that's the mind. I am not the mind, right? And that doesn't mean you don't do it. It means you do it with disinterest, with no idea of result in the moment, because you'll still do the same movement. You won't own it, though. You see the difference? You'll do the movement, you'll make your scrambled eggs, but it will be done through an observance of unfolding karma in the mind. And it will be done with disinterest because you know it cannot affect you. You are across the chasm of unchangeability. You're across the chasm from body mind that cannot be touched by body mind. It can only observe body mind. Right? So it's a way of being in the world. We always remember during the day that we are not this, that we are observing of this, that this is a manifestation of a perfect state, a perfect nature that requires no attention, no change, no effort, no realignment. It only requires silence, inner silence. That's all.
But I find that thank you. That really helps. Does it create like a little bit of a dry kind of relationship with the people around you or events?
A dry relationship?
Like, when you because almost like it's not an involved. There's always like a chasm, where you are aware, or I'm just.
Yes, there's a period, or can be a period like that. Yes, where you're withdrawing, where you're pulling back. But in its mature state, you will be so aware of this infinite ocean of loving bliss within. And because of your universal understanding of yourself, you're not identified with a particular, then that person will arouse in you a resonance with that love that will be deeper than anything you can do as an individual, more meaningful than anything you could communicate through an ego. So yes, there is a period of dryness when we're denying or disassociating, which is a terrible thing to say to a therapist. But when we're observing, simply observing and not identifying with, yes, during that beginning period, it does get dry, can be dry. But the thing that prevents it from staying dry is your reality. Your reality is Satchitananda, which is love itself, wisdom itself. And so in that silence, that your nature can manifest pure, manifest without limit, without quantity. And then your relationships become the same with everyone.
So we're talking about being with people with complete 100%, but being with yourself 200% kind of, right? You're so abiding in yourself that you can be with others.
Yes, but that's a description from the outside in. The experience from the inside out, it's all the same. Your relationship with yourself is exactly the same as your relationship with anyone else. All of the stuff that you have to detach from in yourself for that inner peace is the same things that you have to detach, because they are no different. They are just a thought in your mind also. Every person is just a thought in your own mind of which you know nothing. And when you can see them without any assumption, without objectifying them, your nature combines. That's why these holy people are so wonderful to be around. That's because they look at you, and you just feel like the grandmother of all grandmothers has pinched your cheek and given you a smooch and a pat on the head. All the way down, all the way through your innards. You feel that, and it's because you are them. You see that they see you. They don't see the barriers of body minds. They see you as a direct reflection of the same thing they see themselves to be, a reflection of awareness in mind, right? Whose nature is pure love.
So we've talked about sometimes about kind of superimposing that image on yourself, like you imagine someone like the way you described who inspires such amazing feelings within you because they have that, and then at least
they are you.
Yeah,
There's
you
no
kind of, yeah. Can we I mean, I think I've heard it in our Vedanta centers where they've asked us to kind of, you just put that like that filter on yourself all the time. Like it's not coming naturally, but you kind of have to bring it on so that you kind of will see other people as you too, and then you have that kind of love and immense um, compassion, immense
Yeah.
tolerance. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the path. That's the practice for that approaches the experience, the reality of it. While the mind is purifying, meaning while we're in the process of removing me and mine from our mind and from our worldview, during that time we superimpose, we see God, we take this ideal of God that we don't know yet because we don't know ourselves yet, and we impose it on everyone, as a stage, as a moving toward the realization that is no longer, at some point there will be no longer a practice. The mind will have purified and we will see the reality of it. It will suddenly drop 10 stories deeper within yourself. At first it stays up here as a practice, like, oh, here I am. Okay, I've got to be a good person. Oh, look, I'm so good. I didn't scream at that person today. I was very kind. That's the practice as we're purifying mind. That in that purification process, we're really identifying what me and mine looks like, because we're not even aware, but we've accepted it so intimately. And because once you get to a place where you've pushed much of that away or have transcended much of that, thoughts of me and mine feel almost like more subtle than a punch in the gut, but it's the same kind of discomfort. It's amazing how not selfish we are in our nature. It's amazing how not me and mine oriented we are by nature. But we've been me and mine oriented for so long that we've learned to live with the pain of it. We've learned to live with all of the contradiction of it. We've become unconscious because we've had to in order to live with that pain. And so in our journey back, that all has to be reversed in our letting go, to get back to that child that just wants to walk around the supermarket hugging everyone.
Thank you so much.
Sure. How is the Supreme affected? He says, what can affect it and how? And this is the marvelous. There's so much power toward fearlessness and confidence in this statement. What can affect it and how? When you have done it in your practice and come to that sense of a space, an unchanging you within you, that isn't associated with mind and isn't associated with the body, what can touch it? It's behind a barrier of security that cannot be accessed by anything in this manifesting world. It's only your imagining its effect because you've identified with it. That's why the universe can affect us now. It's not that it affects us now. It's like, a good example. I've seen this online a couple of times where they have a person sit at a table and he puts both his arms flat on the table, and then on one side they put a piece of a block of a blinder of some kind down the center of the table so that his right arm is hidden from him on the other side of this divider, but he can see his left arm. And then they put a fake arm wearing the same color clothing and everything on the visible side of the blinder, right? And then they go and they will touch that fake arm, and that person will feel that sensation. They have to break them in first, because what they do is they run a feather on both the fake arm and the hidden real arm so that the association happens and the person begins to identify with the fake appendage. But he identifies with that appendage so much that when they stop using the feather on the real hand and just use it on the fake hand, that person will experience that feather touching the fake hand. And they always end it in a real dramatic way when they take a hammer and smash the fake hand on the table, and the person screams out in pain and pulls their hand up. And in the action of pulling their hand up, they see that their hand that came up from the other side of the screen is not hammer dented, and they undo the whole thing. That's attachment. That's exactly attachment. That is exactly why you suffer in this world, because you have identified with this fake appendage called a body mind, and so thoroughly identified with it as being yourself that things that happen to it, you feel and say they're happening to you. But through our arduous, seemingly arduous, endless practice of our meditations, where we're trying to become aware of that connection, that assumed connection, and begin withdrawing from it, when that gets some momentum inside, and you start to get that difference, you're truly just not affected. You don't have to discipline yourself into good behavior. You're simply not affected by all of the samsaras that your attachments identified you with. You're not attached to those. You're not identified with those. And so the ego has diminished to such a point that it's not that you have to work at not getting angry. You just don't notice anything that would make you angry, because you can't be touched. You can't be reached in that way. And the thing that prevents you from being just distant and unreachable from the rest of the world is that actually you've become one with the rest of the world through the manifestation of your nature, Satchitananda, without boundary, without limit, without restriction. And you recognize everyone being a part of your own mind. You begin to know that there was never an inside and outside, that there was only mind, and that everyone that you ever knew was actually a part of your own mind. And the love that begins to come from that, the understanding, the empathy, the compassion that begins to arise naturally from that understanding of yourself, is where your freedom lies, where you are independent of condition, independent of circumstance, always soaked in your roscolid syrup of divine love in the shrine of the heart, unmoved, just emanating beauty, wisdom, kindness, strength. So what can affect the Supreme and how?
I had a comment.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm talking so much.
No, it's good.
I've often heard that the obstacle to the final realization, and this is in our yogi circles, is attachment.
Yes.
It's like the obstacle, like to the final chakra, the full opening. Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah, attachment. Yeah, attachment is the problem. Of course, we experience attachments after they've festered, when they're actually causing us pain. Notice them. But yeah, attachment is the only trouble. We've attached ourselves to the changing, identified ourselves with the limited, and forgotten what is quite obvious to us inside, that we're not these things, in the sense that we watch our bodies grow old, and if it wasn't for the sensations coming from the body, what would your age be? You wouldn't know what your age was. It's always external indicators that are telling you have an age. You don't get internal indicators of age. You're free. You have no age. And so we become aware of these things. They start coming to the front, and they become bigger than the world of the senses that we live in now. These truths become bigger than the world. The silence inside becomes more powerful than the noise outside in time. That's like how Swami Prabhupada could carry an atmosphere with him. He could walk into a room, and that room would become his mind. The room would silence. The room would come to order, as it were. wherever he was. He carried it with him. That's because he was manifesting the reality that the internal world is bigger than the external world and more powerful. And when we cross that point and begin to live in that space, spiritual life is not an effort, it's a manifestation. It wafts off of you like the smell of a rose, leaves the rose. The rose doesn't have to try and make it happen. The rose is just being a rose. So this is what happens for us. We're just being divine. We're just being humans in the true sense. So what can affect it and how? The source is not affected by the vagaries of the river, nor is the metal by the shape of the jewelry. It is the light affected by the picture on the screen. The Supreme makes everything possible. That is all. All the lights of they don't have to go and clean the bulb in the projector to get all the color off of it after showing a movie, right? The light is unaffected. The light is unaffected. The light makes the movie possible. The light actually, in that sense, creates the whole world of the movie. Movies are wonderful because in that for a good discussion on metaphysics, movies and dreams are all you need to get perfect examples of all of these truths. That the movie, the light alone, just the light in the projector tells the whole story, creates a whole world, creates a narrative, makes you cry, makes you laugh, makes you terrified, gives you peace. All of that through just changing colors on a screen.
Raj, can you say then, when it says the Supreme makes everything possible, can one also just surmise that the thoughts that come to you, good or bad or whatever, are all the Supreme?
Yes.
Don't take ownership of it that way?
Yes. They are. But they've gone through a filter. The light that you're looking at reflected in mind has gone through the filter of ego.
But the filter is also the Supreme. The ego is also the Supreme.
Yes, just like the movie, the lenses that the light goes through are also part of the projector. But the light, which enables it all, is still unaffected in its essence. You, in your essence, that's why it's realization. You have always been realized. You have always been what you are. You've never been anything but what you are. But because you're looking at the light after it's come through the ego, you're seeing a story. You're seeing a movie, and you believe the movie to be you. You believe the movie to be about you. And so you're pulled into all the emotions and all the situations and all the narratives and are going through it. And but at the end of the movie, when the credits roll, at that point you're released. And you're like, oh, God, what a movie. That was amazing. But you're free from it. And so it's the same process. You can sit in the movie and not be affected by a movie. It's a good practice for a sadhu, for a practitioner. Go to a movie and sit there and watch it and never forget that you're watching light on a screen and that each frame is unchanging. There is no movement. There is no story. There are no humans on that screen. There's only shapes and colors. There is no story there. There's no relationships there. There's no plot there. There's nothing there. Just light dancing on a screen, one still frame after another. And all the practices that you would employ to sit in the movie theater and not forget that you're watching a movie are the exact same practices that you do every morning to step out into the world and realize you are not this. You are not the body mind. You are not the world. You are not this story.
So if you're saying there's no I, because in reality no ego, then even if a thought may come, it is not associated with the I. It's so it can
right.
be,
But at that level, you're in pure mind, so a thought wouldn't even arise. In pure mind,
our level as a practice. That one can say that the thought just arose.
Yes.
And it came, and if everything is done by the Supreme, then it's the Supreme for
Yes.
The
Yes.
thought is also the supreme from the supreme.
That's right. That's right. In the gospel class we had yesterday, where someone asks Thakur, well, if that's true, if God is everywhere and everything and all, why do we have to think about God at all? And he says, if you really felt that way, if that was a sincere thought, if that was a sincere reality, you would be right. There is no need for anything. But the problem is that's not a statement of truth on our part because we believe everything.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. That silent mind betrays God alone. God alone manifests in the silent mind. Ego manifests in a mind of identity. Like that. Oops, oh my gosh. I just managed to go all the way. Okay. All right. So what can affect it and how? The source is not affected by the vagaries of the river, nor is the metal by the shape of the jewelry. Is the light affected by the picture on the screen? The Supreme makes everything possible. That is all. It's like, one of the new ways I talk about this is in your dream at night when you're dreaming, there's no sun in your dream. There's no source of light at all in your dream. And yet you're able to see everything in your dream. You're able to see all of the people and all of the objects. That is a direct experience of the light of consciousness. The light that allows you to see your dreams is God. It is the light of the divine. It is the light of pure love. It's not a physical, as far as I know, it's not a physical light in the mind, but it is an illuminating light. So you can see, you can have a direct experience of the light of consciousness just by being aware that there's not a light bulb in your head when you dream. So you can see it is the Supreme that makes everything visible. And it's the same in this world here, that you're experiencing in the waking world is the same. All of this is illuminated by the light of consciousness. That's why Eckhart Tolle had that in his enlightenment experience. He said that he had that realization that light and love were the same thing. They weren't. Light is not a metaphor of love. Light and love are the same thing, he said. And so you get that. That's the love. What is love? Love is the Supreme. Love is the supreme consciousness. And so it is that supreme light that makes this world visible to you as well as your dream world to you. So, because you can imagine a sun in your dream, just like you imagine a sun in the waking world. Imagine is probably not the right word, but you project it somehow.
Does supreme consciousness have, when you say love is supreme consciousness, does it have an actual quality to it? Or is love closest to it, I guess?
Well, it's quality. Yeah, when it encounters an ego, the ego assumes qualities by how it breaks it up and digests it. But love itself is the container of all qualities. Like, so when the light shines through a frame in the movie, it takes on the quality of that frame in the movie. But the light itself is still the light itself. Did that answer it? My mind just went quiet there. All right. So how is it that some things do happen and some things don't? Seeking out causes is a pastime of the mind, right? So only the mind is interested in causes because it's the mind that has created the idea of causes. Causation is one of the tools that the mind has used to make a narrative out of this unity, out of this singularity. Seeking out causes is a pastime of the mind. There is no duality of cause and effect. There is no such thing. everything is its own cause. Karma yoga, everything done for its own sake. No expectation of results, because results require causation. So it's doing everything purely in the moment for its own sake, which eliminates the ego's projection on it. Because the ego's interested in attainment, the ego's interested in narrative, the ego's interested in results, right? Because it maintains the boundaries. And so it's hard to let go of that. But that's the practice of karma yoga. So seeking out causes is a pastime of the mind. There is no duality of cause and effect. So it's not a helpful way of seeing things. It's always better in the moment. I remember when I first started therapy, I talked to Swami Prabhupada back in 2008. I told him, I'm having terrible depression and I'm not feeling like I can manage, and I want to talk to a therapist. Is that okay? And he actually said, yes, that is a good thing. But he says, only don't throw all of your energy into it. He says the solution will not lie in your mind, but it's good to investigate to learn that. He says, if you poke at your mind for answers to why something, the mind will always give you an answer, even though that answer is completely made up. It will always find a why for what you think, but it will create that why in the moment. It won't be a true reason. You just did it because you did it. There's no why. You'll ask why later, and then you'll make up a narrative, which will increase your bondage. So going into the mind to solve the mind is not the way. Pulling out of the mind and observing it and let it betray its own folly is the way. My depression didn't start improving, didn't start going away until I realized I was not depressed, that I was looking through a depressed mind. That made all the difference in the world, because then I could choose to experience it or not. I could say, oh yeah, that's depression. And instead of saying I'm depressed, and when you've said I'm depressed, you've defined it. You're now a victim of depression. But when you say I'm looking through a depressed mind, then you can still be Satchitananda. And you can understand coming out the other side is depression, but you don't have to be affected by it. This is how we can use Advaita to transcend our weakness. The weakness is only our problem when we see it as our problem. When you know the problem has nothing to do with you, it falls into an objectivity that makes it easily solved. If there's no attachment, there's no clinging. And if there's no clinging, things can be easily rearranged, refixed. So this is the benefit of staying in the moment, which minimizes causation. Stay in the presence, which reminds us of our nature, of the presence of love. And be. Let happen what happens. No steering necessary. And you'll be surprised to find that your karma, your samskaras, and the wheel of samsara will still play out your life perfectly, even though you've let go of the handle. It's only your identity that made you think you were the doer. But in fact, it was just carrying on a string of karma. That was all. All right.